If 2011 was the year of revolutionary change, maybe 2012 will be the year of electoral change. 26 of the world's nations go to the polls this year to vote for their president, prime minister, their punching bag in chief. That includes 4 of the 5 UN Security Council members, the United States, of course, but also France and Russia, where Mr. Putin, not surprisingly, got the nod. And China has a big leadership change coming, too. These 4 countries alone represent 40% of the world's GDP. So what does all this potential change mean amidst all of the other challenges in the world? I've got a great panel to talk about this. Anne-Marie Slaughter and Richard Haass are both former directors of policy planning for the State Department. Anne-Marie has returned to Princeton, where she is a professor of politics and international affairs, and Richard Haass is, of course, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. On the other side of the table, Bruce Buena de Mesquita is a professor of politics at New York University. Welcome. So, Richard, when you were in government, would you find that there was an election, let's say Sarkozy loses to Francois Hollande, will it make a difference?
Actually, it will. You've got one person, Monsieur Sarkozy, who's running as if he wants to turn France into Germany, and you have Monsieur Hollande, who's running as if he wants to turn France into Greece. And given the situation in Europe right now, this might be an election that actually does matter. If Mr. Hollande actually would implement 10 or 20% of what he's saying, it would make a difference. It actually would matter more than an election in what you might call a mature democracy would normally matter.
Anne-Marie, you're shaking your head.
No, do we ever agree? But I think he might want to do all those things, but I'm more worried about trends in German politics than I am in French politics. I really think the EU depends on France and Germany, and France and Germany depend on the Eurozone continuing in terms of both their economies. So I don't think it's going to be so big.
The issues you're talking about is Hollande is proposing first, a very, very large role for the state, and France already has, but 75% tax rates, and also proposing that the French get out of the business of this partnership with Germany and enforcing fiscal discipline on southern Europe. You think they'll have to continue doing that, but your worry is that the Germans will not be able to keep doing it.
The real concern is that Germany decides it doesn't want to play the central role it has played in the EU, which has been the banker, which has been the country that often makes economic sacrifices for purposes of greater political union. And German voters are tired. It's in Germany's economic interest to do that, but politically, that's not as sure a thing as it has been.
Bruce, you do a lot of modeling. You do a lot of modeling for the CIA, for the State Department, for other governments. If you were to try to construct a model, do you think that about whether the euro is going to survive or collapse through this period of crisis? What would you say?
I think the euro is going to likely survive, at least for the next few years. We talk longer term, that's a different matter. I think also that Richard's a little optimistic about the electoral possibilities in France.
You think Sarkozy will likely win?
I think he will likely win, and I think it wouldn't make a big difference who wins, because politicians in democracies are constrained. They can move a little bit, they can't move far. I think we should note, with regard to France, that people thought that President Obama, when he was President-elect Obama, was going to have policies radically different from George W. Bush. And on the domestic front, he certainly has, and in some parts of the foreign policy front, he has. But mostly, we're still in Guantanamo. We're still in Afghanistan. There hasn't been this radical shift.
Well, we're pulling out. We're pulling out of Afghanistan, and domestically, hang on. We've had financial reform, we've had health care, not of the scale he proposed, but those have been bigger domestic changes than any other government has been able to.
But there's one place where, Anne-Marie, you'd have to admit there will be significant continuity. Vladimir Putin becoming president as opposed to prime minister of Russia.
Yes.
I assume that you don't think there'll be much change in Russian foreign policy?
Actually, I'm not so sure. I think, yes, of course, Putin was elected. Everybody knew he was going to be elected. That's not different. What is different?
But he was also already running the country anyway.
Yes, he was already running the country, and he clearly imagines another possible 2 terms. I do think he's going to be under different constraints. I think he is going to be facing either having to be much more repressive, really shutting down the opposition in a way to now he has not done, or he's going to have to start reforming in the way he says he wants to do. His own account is, I stabilize the country, I increase the economy, the national income, we're now growing, we're now strong. Now I can turn to a sort of more orderly transition to democracy. That's his story. That would be a way out with I think, given the political pressures. But it's also possible, certainly given his background, that that's all talk, and in which case he's going to have to really tighten the screws on the opposition, and then we might really see a lot of turbulence.
Do you think that Putin is a person with whom the United States can continue to deal, and that he will be a likely cooperative partner on some issues like Iran and things? You know, because there's this whole idea the Obama administration had, which was we're going to reset relations with Russia, not because we love them, but because they have a veto in the Security Council, because we need them for a bunch of things, and we can establish a good working relationship. Do you think that that's likely?
I think the administration was right to try the reset. It's probably now going to be necessary to somewhat reset the reset. Putin's a spoiler. And when people face the kinds of choices Anne-Marie described at home, and I think it's probably 60-40 or more likely he goes towards repression than real opening, the tendency is to use foreign policy a bit to vent and to distract and the rest. So my hunch is Putin is even less of a partner moving forward than he has been to date, which, by the way, is not much of a partner to begin with. I think this is going to be a rough relationship. We're not talking about going back to the Cold War, but essentially the United States is going to have to tackle a lot of these geopolitical challenges. Syria is an indication, I think Iran going forward, without much help from Russia. Probably, by the way, just one less, it might mean less and less role for the United Nations. If China and Russia are not there as partners in the UN, increasingly multilateralism is going to have to be a little bit narrower and without the formality of the UN.
Well, what I'm struck by in broader terms is that there is a difference between China and Russia. Though China is a country that kind of wants to modernize, it feels like it has very parochial, selfish interests that it wants to guard. The Russians, on the other hand, are the only major power that are also basically an oil state. So in a very strange sense, the Russians benefit from international tension. They don't particularly benefit from those international tensions being solved.
I think that's exactly right. The Chinese benefit from tensions being solved because it gives them cheaper oil and they need the energy. The Russians benefit from the price being high. And I'm betting on what Putin will do. If the price of oil is high, he'll oppress, because that's the efficient way when he's got the money to pay people to take to the streets and bash heads in. Then he'll become more oppressive. If the price of oil were to drop substantially, then he would probably liberalize, because that would be the efficient solution under those circumstances. The likelihood that the price of oil is going to drop, not real.
All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about Iran.